The ocean doesn't keep secrets, it just waits for the tide to go out. Hello, and a massive welcome to the American Crime Bureau. You've heard about the tragedy in the Bahamas, the grieving husband, and the unpredictable waves. But today, I'm taking you inside a forensic vault of evidence that has remained hidden until this very second. We aren't just looking at a missing persons case anymore, we are looking at a calculated digital blackout and a vessel that was turned into a floating crime scene. If you think you know what happened to Lynette Hooker, you've been fed a script. Today, we tear that script apart. Make sure you're subscribed and the bell is on, because once we pull this thread, there is no going back. It was 7:30 p.m. on April 4th in the crystalline waters of Hopetown. Brian Hooker claims this was the moment his life fractured. According to his story, a rogue wave hit their tiny, underpowered e-dinghy, and in a split-second blur of white water and chaos, his wife, Lynette, simply bounced out. But here is the first glitch in the narrative that should make your blood run cold. Brian claims Lynette went overboard holding the only ignition key. In the world of maritime safety, that is a death sentence for the person left on the boat. Without that key, the motor dies. You are a sitting duck. Brian told investigators he was forced to paddle, desperately, frantically, against 27-knot winds in a dinghy that handles like a beach ball. He says he fought the ocean for over 8 hours just to reach the shore at Marsh Harbor by 4 a.m. the next day. But as the sun rose, the storm Brian described started to evaporate under forensic scrutiny. We've spoken to captains who were in those exact waters that night. Their logs don't show a life-threatening tempest. They show manageable seas. So, if there was no monster storm, why did it take Brian nearly 9 hours to travel a distance that should have taken 40 minutes? This is where the retention engineering of this case gets dark. While Brian was supposedly paddling for his life, the GPS tracking on their primary sailboat, the Soulmate, did something impossible. It didn't just lose signal. It was manually, intentionally silenced. Think about that. Your wife has just vanished into the black abyss of the Atlantic. You are alone, terrified, and desperate. Do you spend those critical first hours navigating a manual shutdown of your vessel's AIS and GPS systems? Or do you scream into the radio until your throat bleeds? Brian chose silence. And while he eventually posted a heartbreaking tribute on Facebook, claiming his sole focus was finding his beloved Lynette, his actions told a different story. Within days of being released from Bohemian custody, he didn't stay to search the reefs. He didn't hire divers. He left. He fled back to the States, citing his mother's health, leaving his wife's shadow behind in the salt water. But the U.S. Coast Guard wasn't watching the Facebook posts. They were watching the data. They waited until the Soulmate crossed back into federal waters, and then they moved with surgical precision. They didn't just board the boat, they seized it. They towed it to a high-security station in Fort Pierce, wrapped it in forensic tape, and began a deep audit that is now stretched into 2026. They are looking for more than just domestic disputes. They are looking for the ghost window, that 9-hour gap where the GPS went dark and Lynette disappeared. The question isn't just where Lynette is. The question is, what happened on that deck during the hours the world wasn't allowed to watch? The investigation didn't just intensify, it went surgical. As the Soulmate sat docked at the Coast Guard station in Fort Pierce, shielded from public view by heavy gates and federal jurisdiction, a team of forensic narrative architects began peeling back the layers of a month-old crime scene. You have to understand, maritime forensics is a race against the salt. Salt air corrodes, water washes away, and time is the greatest enemy of the truth. But in 2026, the technology being used on Brian Hooker's sailboat is something he never saw coming. They aren't just looking for fingerprints, they are looking for the invisible. When federal agents stepped onto that deck, they weren't just looking at a boat. They were looking at a puzzle where the pieces had been intentionally shaved down to fit a lie. Brian's defense has always been built on the unpredictable sea. But investigators began a process called Luminol mapping. This isn't like the movies where a quick spray shows a glowing handprint. This is a high-sensitivity chemical sweep of the deck and the interior cabin. And what they found started to crack the foundation of Brian's accident story. There were anomalous patterns, scrub marks that didn't align with standard boat maintenance. It appeared as though specific areas of the deck had been bleached with an intensity that suggests someone was trying to reset the clock on the DNA evidence. But why the extreme cleaning? If your wife falls off a dinghy in the middle of the night, why is the primary sailboat being scrubbed like a surgical suite? This brings us back to the ghost window. Using advanced satellite telemetry, the Coast Guard Investigative Service, or CGIS, managed to recover breadcrumb data from the Soulmate's onboard computers that Brian thought were purged. The data shows that while the boat was in the middle of the ocean heading back toward Florida, the engine wasn't just idling. It was stationary. For 9 hours, the vessel sat like a tombstone in the water. During this window, the manual kill switch for the GPS was engaged. Think about the physical exertion required here. Brian claims he was exhausted from his heroic paddle to shore in the Bahamas. Yet, the forensic timeline suggests that shortly after his release from custody, the boat was being operated with a level of technical precision that contradicts a man in the throes of grief. And then there are the phones. When the authorities seized the digital devices, they found that the communication between Brian and Lynette in the final 48 hours wasn't the beloved exchange he described on Facebook. The metadata reveals a spike in tension, a digital trail of a relationship that was hitting a breaking point long before they ever reached Hopetown. Is it possible that the dinghy accident was a staged finale for a much darker play? The retired investigators we've consulted say the Coast Guard doesn't seize a multi-million-dollar vessel and hold it for years just to check a missing persons box. They do it because they have found a forensic signature, something that proves a struggle occurred where only a stroll was reported. As we look at the photos of that boat sitting in the Fort Pierce sun, you can almost feel the weight of what's hidden beneath the fiberglass. But as Brian sits in Michigan, safe behind his legal team, he's about to realize that the digital ghosts of the Soulmate are finally starting to speak. Stay with me, because what Lynette's daughter discovered next is the most heartbreaking twist of all. While forensic teams in Fort Pierce dismantled the physical evidence on the Soulmate, a more visceral war was being fought on dry land. For Karli Aylesworth, Lynette's daughter, the silence from the ocean was deafening, but the silence from her stepfather was even worse. As Mother's Day 2026 arrived, Karli stood before a camera, eyes heavy with the weight of a month spent in a nightmare, and delivered a message that shattered the tragic accident narrative. It was her first Mother's Day without her mom, and the pain wasn't just in the loss, it was in the mystery. Karli didn't just share grief. She shared a discovery that should have set off every alarm bell in the Coast Guard's command center. She revealed that while Brian was in Michigan claiming to be heartbroken and focused on the search, the Soulmate was already being moved. But it wasn't Brian at the helm. Karli watched helplessly via tracking apps as two mysterious men, individuals she had never seen and whose names had never been mentioned, boarded her mother's home. And then, the ultimate betrayal of transparency, they deactivated the GPS. They turned off the vessel's digital heartbeat, effectively making the Soulmate a ghost ship as it cut through the Atlantic toward Florida. Think about the psychological impact of that moment. You are a daughter searching for your mother, and the primary piece of evidence, the very deck she stood on before she vanished, is being ghosted across international waters by strangers. Why the secrecy? Why would an innocent man authorize a digital blackout of a vessel under active investigation? Karli has been vocal, appearing on every major platform from News Nation to Dateline, raising questions that the Bahamian authorities seemingly ignored. She pointed to a volatile relationship, a history of problems that Brian's lawyers have tried to scrub from the public record. But Karli isn't the only one finding contradictions. The U.S. Coast Guard Investigative Service recently released a series of graining, haunting photos. They aren't looking for the Soulmate, they already have it. They are looking for another boat. A mystery sailboat that was moored just yards away from the Hookers near Aunt Pat's Bay on the night of April 4th. This is a forensic pivot that changes everything. Investigators believe someone on that second vessel saw or heard something that night. Was it the sound of a struggle? The splash of a body? Or the sound of a dinghy motor that wasn't actually struggling against a storm? As we sit in mid-May 2026, the walls are closing in. Brian Hooker left the Bahamas promising he would never stop searching until Lynette was found. He walked out of a Freeport jail cell as a free man, but he left behind a trail of unanswered questions and a family that is no longer asking for help. They are demanding justice. They are tired of the benefit of the doubt. They are tired of hearing about unpredictable seas. The narrative of the grieving husband is being replaced by the image of a man who vanished from the search site as quickly as his wife vanished from the boat. But the ocean is about to give up its most damning piece of evidence yet. As the sun sets on the coast of Florida, the forensic lights inside the Coast Guard's high-security hangar in Fort Pierce stay on. This is no longer a search for a missing person. It is a full-scale excavation of a secret. Investigators are moving beyond the physical deck and into the digital soul of the Soulmate. They have found the kill switch data, and it tells a story that Brian Hooker's lawyers can't explain away with unpredictable seas. The latest reports from May 2026 suggest that the 9-hour ghost window where the vessel's tracking went dark wasn't a technical glitch. It was a manual override. But the most damning evidence might not come from the boat itself, but from the silence of the ocean. Local boaters in Hopetown have pointed out that a body in those specific currents doesn't just vanish without a trace unless it was weighted or moved. The discovery of only a single flotation device near Elbow Cay, far from where Brian claimed the struggle occurred, has pushed federal agents to look at this as a recovery mission of a different kind. They are now interviewing the occupants of a second mystery sailboat that was moored just yards away that night. Did they hear the cascade of failures Brian described, or did they hear something much more final? While Brian sits in Michigan, shielded by a legal team that insists he is traumatized and heartbroken, the American public is watching the evidence pile up like driftwood. The volatile history of the couple, the suspicious 4:00 a.m. arrival at Marsh Harbor, and the deactivation of the GPS by mysterious agents all point to a conclusion that is becoming impossible to ignore. Lynette Hooker didn't just fall, she was erased from a narrative that was carefully constructed before the dinghy ever hit the water. The Soulmate remains under federal guard, a silent witness to whatever happened in the dark of April 4th. As forensic technology in 2026 continues to bridge the gap between suspicion and proof, the perfect maritime accident is beginning to look like a perfectly planned disappearance. We are waiting for the final report from the Coast Guard Investigative Service, but one thing is clear: the truth doesn't drown. It waits for the tide to turn. And for Brian Hooker, the tide is coming in fast.